It's our pleasure to inaugurate the first, inaugurate, that's a redundancy, sorry, but the first CITS lecture series with Dr. Suzanne Zhang, who will be talking about how language laws can affect your future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I'm the first here. Thank you, everybody. And we're trying to do this lecture series to get, because there's so much interest. Now that you've put this lay on me, I don't know how to put this microphone back on, sorry. All right, is that okay? That's okay. Okay, very good. Thank you. Yeah, so anyway, we want to welcome all of you to how language laws can affect your future. And actually, especially for the teachers in the room, this might be good information for you to pass on to your students and for students to come on. I always like to see who is in the audience, but I guess we'll just go ahead and straight into this. Some of you don't even know that we have a Center for Interpretation and Translation Studies, and some people find out about us and say, hey, that might have maybe I could learn something about interpreting and translating, because very often, we work with students who are speaking another language, or they come from another language background and they're studying in English, but a lot of them may, in the future, no matter what job they have, end up having to interpret or translate. But there are laws in America. America's changing quickly, and especially here in Hawaii. And there's a lot of things that I think are very interesting for students and teachers to know that in the future, it might affect you. So let's look at some of what's happening here in Hawaii. So some of this might be, statistics or laws, and so hopefully you can stick with me here. 18% of immigrants are foreign-born. What I mean by immigrants, we have 18% of our immigrants are, 18% of the population are immigrants. At least they're born in another country and they've moved here. That's Hawaii. And 51 of immigrants speak English less than very well. And then 25% speak a language other than English at home. That ranks 9th in the nation. And a lot of the states that are above us might be something like Texas, where a lot of them speak Spanish at home, and it's very, maybe just 1 or 2 other languages. But Hawaii has so many languages, and about 1 in 8 Hawaii residents, about 12%, are considered limited English proficient, and we call them LEPs. That's a coin word that we like to talk about a lot now. And 124 languages are spoken in Hawaii, and that includes all the dialects of various languages. So it's pretty amazing how many languages are spoken here. Of course, that's not the most common. The most common languages actually are about 16, maybe 18. And so if you look at this is from the courts of 2012, the fiscal year. You can see the top 15 languages used in state courts. And so you see there's Chuukese, which is a Micronesian language. Then we have the Filipino language, Ilocano. Then we have Korean. Marshallese is another Micronesian area, Pacific Islander. Spanish, especially in Hilo and in Maui. We have a lot of Spanish over there. And then Vietnamese, Japanese, especially the tourists. Then we have Tongan and Tagalog, which is another Filipino language, American Sign Language. This is in terms of their need in court and how much money they actually spent on interpreting. And then we have Samoan, and then Cantonese, which is a Chinese language, Pohnpeian, which is Micronesian, and then Mandarin, and Kosraean, which is another Micronesian. So the Micronesian migration to Hawaii has really risen even more in 2013. So the influx is these statistics will change. For example, Spanish is growing in the courts, and then other things will change. It used to be Ilocano is number 1, no longer it's being pushed down now. So this changes, but anyway, as of 2012. And then we have what we call, what is limited English proficiency? What does that refer to? Well, the question is, an LEP person, an LEP is actually an adjective. I don't know why they didn't just say limited English person, but they didn't. They call it limited English proficient. Then you need a noun after that person, and that refers to somebody who doesn't speak English as their primary language, and 2, has a limited ability to read, write, speak, or understand the English language. It's just that simple. There are different levels of proficiency. But anyway, this is how what we say, LEP person. I don't know, a few years ago when I was in Kaiser Hospital, and I noticed they started asking a new question to their patients when they were checking in. What is your primary language? They use the word primary, but what is your preferred language? What is your preferred language? Because they're trying to get you can't say what is your mother tongue because that has too many meanings. And so now they're saying, primary or preferred language to see what they would rather speak in when they're talking about medical, issues. So, okay, now what are laws related to language access? And the laws have really taken effect in the last few years. Well, first of all, there's federal laws. There's the U.S. Constitution. Constitution, the 5th and the 14th Amendments talk about fundamental fairness and equal protection. And also the 6th Amendment, the right to cross-exam. So you can cross-exam, want to cross-examine someone, but if you can't speak English, you're going to have a hard time, right? So if I'm taken to court and I don't understand what's happening in court and I can't even cross-examine someone because of my limited English, it's not a fair trial. So the courts are really paying attention to this issue. Then we have Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. When we talk about civil rights, we don't think about language. But now it's changing. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 says, no person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity that's receiving federal financial assistance. Let me kind of explain this. For example, let's say a federal financial assistance, social services, let's say welfare. There are certain things in welfare that are actually financed by the federal government. Maybe the state implements it, but they're financed by the federal government. There's some federal housing complexes. Well, if somebody came in and said, oh, I need help, I need social services, I'm poor, I need this, and then they say, sorry, I don't understand you. Can you come back with an English person? Well, they're breaking the law. Because this is saying you're discriminating because of their national origin, on the basis of natural origin. So national origin, and not just race and color, is also a reason to be for discrimination. Now, this is particularly to institutes that handle federal money. So it's not talking about private practices, that's a different thing. But this is especially for financial assistance, for federal funds. Now, the executive order came from President Clinton, and it came in 2000, and he clarified it. So he made this executive order, and it requires all agencies receiving federal funds to provide meaningful access for LEP persons to programs, services, and activities. So that made it where any agency that receives federal funds that offer services to its citizens cannot discriminate on the basis of natural origin. And national origin includes language. So language shows a person's national origin. So what happened a few years ago, the Department of Human Services, the food stamp program in particular, somebody came to the window and they couldn't understand the person, and actually the person needed food stamps, and was eligible, but when they were talking, I'm sorry, I don't understand you, can you please come back with somebody who speaks English? Well, they sent the person away, hungry, not even knowing that's what they were there for, and somehow civil rights got a hold of it. So then it went to the National Civil Rights Office, who ended up suing the Department of Human Services here in Hawaii. And that was just a few years ago. So they said, you basically broke the law, and you received federal funds, and whatever. And they were like, but we know we should provide interpreters. It was the person sitting at the window. And they're saying, then your training program has a problem. So let's settle this out of court, and let's work on your training procedures, your language access plans. What are you going to do if somebody calls, somebody comes to the window, and how are you going to implement that? And what about all the nonprofit agencies or organizations that you give money to below you, like Catholic Charities and all these, probably 200 agencies that help you do your work, whether it be counseling or workforce or training or any kind of social services, housing, supplements, SSI, Social Security benefits, etc. All of those agencies that work under them are required as well to provide language access. So they really got on them, and that made Hawaii like, oh, we better do something. So what happened in Hawaii, and that was like in 1996, I think, or 95. This is taken from a case in the Ninth Circuit. Mr. Perez, is this your signature on the declaration? He answers yes. You do not read or write English, do you? No. How is it that you, who do not speak English, read English, or write English, how is it that you were able to sign a declaration in English? How can you sign a declaration when you are not familiar with its contents? I just don't understand. Do you understand what's in the statement in front of you now? Yes or no? No. So they found out a lot of people were signing things because somebody said to sign it and they weren't really understanding it. It says, I, the undersigned, understand that I'm giving up my rights to a trial. I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And it happened all the time. People are signing without fully understanding what was happening. Then the Hawaii Constitution also supports due process and equal protection. Section 5 says, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor be denied the equal protection of the law, nor be denied the enjoyment of the person's civil rights, or be discriminated against in the exercise thereof because of race, religion, sex, or ancestry. So their term of ancestry refers to national origin. So this is in the state constitution. But it didn't mean anything really to anybody until 2006. And 2006 was established the Hawaii Language Access Law. And it took nonprofit organizations and a group of them to fight for this like year after year until it finally was passed in 2006. And we call it the Language Access Law. It establishes the Office of Language Access, quote, to affirmatively address on account of national origin the language access needs of limited English proficient persons. So the office is there to find out what the needs are. 2, require state agencies to take reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access for LEP persons to state-funded programs, services, and activities. So the federal law and the mandate and the presidential order was to federally funded agencies. The state took that and said, now we require state-funded agencies to provide meaningful access. Meaning, if you want access to their services and you don't understand the meaning, then you need some kind of access. You need a bridge. And that's when language access comes into play. That's why they call it the Language Access Law. Usually, misunderstanding or not understanding is due to language. So then they needed interpreters, translators, et cetera, and they have gone about establishing these things. And then they talked, even in the rules of evidence. Now this is in court of law. Rule number 604 says, under interpreter, says an interpreter is subject to the provisions of these rules relating to qualifications as an expert and the administration of an oath or affirmation that the interpreters will make a true translation. What that means is that they're trying to push interpreters saying, hey, you need to interpret accurately even in the courtroom. So when you walk in court and you're going to interpret, the court clerk is supposed to make you raise your right hand as an interpreter and swear to interpret faithfully and accurately to the best of your ability. Now anyone can say that. Doesn't mean they're that good, okay? So let me... okay, and then we started having language access cases here before the law came into play. The second one, you can look at that, requires provision of an interpreter for an LEP parent in the termination of parental rights proceedings in family court. So they were going to family court and they realized, okay, so we're providing interpreters for defendants. What about for family members when they're going to take away their child and they don't understand what's happening? So then these laws started coming into play. So I'm going to go back real quick to language access law. And just so you understand, what happened is when this law came into effect in 2006, they established a committee of advisors. And so Office of Language Access has this committee of advisors that meet once a month or once every 2 months, because the office themselves don't know anything about language access except that it's needed. So they themselves really started from the beginning, from the very bottom, saying, okay, what should we require of our agencies to do? Okay, let's make them write a plan. So then they told, hey, every agency out there, tell us your language access plan. If somebody comes to your window, what are you going to do? How are you going to get interpreters? And they're like, we can't find interpreters. We don't know where to get them. Or we call and they don't show up, and we have a hard time getting interpreters, and we can't afford to pay, these professional interpreters. What are we going to do? So all of a sudden, you see this dust rising from, the ground, and everyone's in, what do we do? Now, the University of Hawaii was also received a letter saying you need to provide language access plan. You have to come up with a plan. So I actually met with Mia Watanabe for quite some time, and we discussed, and also we got KCC involved and other campuses involved. Do we as a university need to provide language access? Because everyone who goes here are college students. Aren't they supposed to have a required amount of English level in order to come to the university? So, but the problem is, we discussed and we found out there's certain places in a student's life, for example, or even in a faculty's life, there's certain areas that they may come in contact with that they would prefer to speak their first language or their non-English language. Can you imagine what those areas are? What would be so important to a student that they say, wait a minute, I want to talk in my other language? Anybody?
Grievance?
A grievance hearing. Like any kind of hearing, or any kind of, when I say hearing, I mean, yeah, like where there's a committee in front of you and is nervous and you're trying to say, hey, I want to, okay, so grievance hearing, where else?
Academic counseling?
Academic counseling, okay. Maybe something even more serious than that.
Health?
Yeah, health. What about health? When health comes into play, people are really concerned. They really want to know exactly what is wrong with me. And so, okay, you're talking to me in English, but wait a minute, I didn't study health. I'm in the sciences. I'm in agriculture, for example. I didn't study all these health things. And another one is something like when something happens like sexual assault, sex assault, anything emotional, counseling services. To me, counseling services should have a poster that says, we provide interpreters if you need, free of charge, because that's what the law is, free of charge. So we actually grappled with this, and we thought, should we do training with teachers or training maybe with security? Maybe we should train security in how to deal with people who, of LEP speakers, who might become LEP because they're emotional, whereas normally they're fine. Their English is fine. But once you have an emotional situation, one time we were giving a talk here at UH, and after that talk, I said, oh, let's go, thank you for a student of mine, thanks for carrying the equipment. Hey, I'll treat you to a coffee. You help me. So we went up to Starbucks, and on the way, she goes, oh my God, I can't find my wallet. Oh, I think I left it on the bus. What am I going to do? Oh. And I said, well, let's just call the bus company, So we're walking up to Starbucks, going to order a coffee. And I called the bus company, and, and I said, here's a number. I'll order. And she was, could you explain? And so I said, okay, this person lost, what color is it? Oh, it's a red wallet, it's about this long, and it was on this bus number, and they said, hold on, they found it. And in the meantime, while they're looking, I said, what do you want to order? She goes, oh, I want the kind that has the, I said, can you just read? Okay, I said, you mean the coffee latte or something? Yeah. I said, okay, it was so amazing that her mind was. And then they said, oh, they found it. You're kidding me, they found it. Oh my God, that's wonderful. Did you get my coffee latte? Did you get it? I'm like, wow, your English came back. I was just like blown away. So it's really interesting how our language, or especially our second language, just goes downhill when we're tired or emotional or things like that. So when we understand that, it's easier to understand why someone in the courtroom or in the medical situation would need an interpreter. Any questions about these laws so far? Pretty boring laws, but as long as we understand what they mean. Okay, good. Now, let me go to this one. What are the bills under review now? You know, there's 4 bills right now in the legislature that they're under review, and they all have to do with language and language access. And if you actually type, if you go to their the page, you can type in language access, search, and then you'll find these bills that come out. So it's very interesting. But there's one, and I kind of went backwards. I probably should have put 48 before 49, but let me explain. 1749 appropriates funds for 3 positions within the Office of Language Access. When the Office of Language Access was established, they had 5 positions. One was the director. The director position was written in the law. So in 07 or 08 or something, when the economy goes kaboom, they said, sorry, we can't fund your positions anymore. But since the director was there by law, he stayed. So the office stayed because it was there by law. But the other positions were gone. So he was alone for a year or 2. He just worked alone after getting all these things started, people having their plans, having monthly meetings, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's alone. Then eventually a year or 2 later, they gave him one more person. And then they gave them, I think, one more. So now there's 3. One is a secretary, one is the director, and one is a legal person. And so now they're asking for more money to replace those people by funds, by please fund the positions so we can get them back. Also last year they passed a very important bill that a lot of us were against. And it said the Office of Language Access will establish a language web, I don't know what it is, center for resources. And I said, that's great. But the second part of the bill said, and a list of qualified certified interpreters. And I'm like, oh no. First of all, there are no certified interpreters, except maybe in the court. But what about community? What about the medical? What about this is like, and it says something like they will certify interpreters. I'm like, how are you going to certify as an office interpreters? You're not a language certification, expert. And so the law, I was just like, I can't believe this passed. Because it was hard for someone like myself to go and say, hey, I oppose this bill or this part of the bill because it looks like I oppose language access. But I don't oppose, it was just a really tough situation, especially as teachers. It's kind of hard to get involved in that. But anyway, so what happens is that bill gives them another 3 positions, but it doesn't necessarily fund the positions. So they're looking for funding to fund the positions, and they need a web expert, somebody who can actually do the resource, building resources. It sounds as if they were going to translate all of these. It was written in a way as like they're going to translate all the state offices' documents. And I'm like, there's no way they're going to translate even one office documents because they don't have the expertise. And I don't know, are you going to hire somebody? There's just a lot of issues with that bill. But it passed, and now they are trying to get more and more every single year, more money to fund this and try to figure out what they're doing. So, so that's one thing that passed last year. And I think the website's a great idea, to help people find out where they can have language resources. But it's really for state agencies. And a lot of the agencies thought that once they have this list of interpreters, because if you read the supporting, the people who support it, the ones who wrote letters, they're saying, it's great, we finally can have interpreters, we can save money. And I'm like, they're not going to give you free interpreters. That's not what this is for. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about that bill that passed last year. But this year, they just want funds for that. The next one is 1748, and that appropriates funds for financial assistance for Hawaii interpreters for training and certification in medical or healthcare interpretation, whatever the difference is. I don't know why they used an or. I don't even know why they have 2 different ones. But anyway, in medical or healthcare interpretation, and for the development of medical glossaries in the primary foreign languages spoken in Hawaii. Okay, so if there's primary languages, probably about 16 of them. I don't know, every office has their own list. I don't know what the list is. But basically, it's supposed to give them funds for training and certification they added the word training because I said you can't just do certification. You have to have training first. And certification of medical interpretation and for the development of medical glossaries. And this came out of a need that actually we raised constantly. How can you have a medical test when you don't even have glossaries in the Micronesian languages? You need to build the languages first. Now, the equality and access to the courts, the office in the judiciary, well, let me put it this way. The state of Hawaii judiciary joined this consortium, which is a national, it's an organization of a lot of different states that come together, and they have these tests that each state, if you join it for like $25,000, each state can use their tests that they have online to give tests to judicial interpreters, court interpreters. The problem is they don't have the languages, they don't have all the languages that we need here in Hawaii. They didn't have Ilocano, they didn't have Tagalog, they don't have Samoan and Chuukese and Marshallese. So the state of Hawaii said, okay, well, we'll pay you to, and maybe we'll go in with Oregon or Washington and create a Chuukese test. So I'm like, who's going to pass the test? If there's no glossary to study, how do you know what terms they're supposed to use for arraignment or plea or initial appearance or whatever, sentencing? So there needs to be a glossary first or dictionaries first in order to have a test, right? It just seems fair to do it in that order, but they never did. In fact, they got people here in our Filipino department to create the Ilocano and maybe Tagalog, but they did at least the Ilocano test. And I said, do you have a glossary? And they helped create it. They also, our Samoan department, I don't know if it's a department but anyway, the department also helped create the test for court in Samoan. And I asked him, where did you get the glossaries? Where did you come up with the language? He goes, yeah, that's the problem. I'm like, okay. So anyway, that's one of my concerns, and for high level help with that. Okay, so it looks like this one's going to pass, by the way. It looks like this one very well may pass. And I think the first one passed, but this one probably will pass. And guess what they're going to do? The Office of Language Access might be calling us, might be calling the different departments and say, hey, can you guys create a glossary? And then we have to say, okay, how much money are you going to pay us? And then, how are we going to go about, getting money and people involved, and how are we going to go about doing this? So it's something that I have a feeling is on the horizon for us, and maybe for students. Maybe we can get a GA with, in a certain language, or maybe to help create that and go do the research with our assistants. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Another one is 1740 says it amends the appropriations provided in Act 217. Whatever, for the establishment of the statewide Language Access Resource Center. This is the one I was talking to you about. And establishment of the multilingual website pilot project administered by the Office of Language Access. So this is the one that releases the funds. They need appropriations, they need funds for the following year to help establish this statewide Language Access Resource Center. Don't know what that means, okay? But anyway, and a multilingual website pilot project. Okay, so 1972 requires, listen to this one, this involves UH, requires the Office of Language Access to implement identification training and certification procedures to develop a multilingual state workforce. Requires the University of Hawaii to develop and administer language training courses. And if you read the law, what's happening is that they want state workers to be able to converse and do their job in a second language. So maybe they learned a little Japanese at home or this language at home, but they're not on a level that they can use in their everyday work. So they want the University of Hawaii to provide courses, high-level language courses, to train them. And you can imagine the issues that are involved in this bill. A lot of the details that are going to be very tough. Well, the university actually issued their stance against this, saying that, why would OLA, or the Office of Language Access, dictate the University of Hawaii what we're supposed to teach, basically. And there's a lot of problems with this bill. So I don't think this one's going to pass. But you can see that all of these bills are trying to increase the workforce, or I should say the multilingual state workforce. And this is what the governor is supporting. A multilingual state workforce, he's proud of it. He pushes for it, and so he's going to support anything that has to do with multilingualism. He has already supported the language roadmap that Dina Yoshimi is in charge of, and that actually was kicked off, I guess, the end of the summer last year. And so he really is supportive of anything language. So what's happening is anything to do with language, they're getting in the bill right now, this year, because the governor is still in office. And they think he's going to support any kind of language thing. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, let me go to the next one. Let's talk about hospital and tell you about maybe not laws, but accreditation standards. There's something called the Joint Commission, and it's called JCOB. I don't know. It's Joint Commission on something, but they just call themselves a Joint Commission. And just like the university has accreditation, an accreditation authority, so do hospitals and healthcare. And it's called the Joint Commission, and they have accreditation standards. And you don't really have to read this, but what's happening is that they're really pushing interpreters, really pushing good quality interpretation in healthcare. So, for example, if they came out here not long ago, and if they went to the hospital and they say, oh, the cleanliness meets our standards, this meets our standards, what about interpretation? Who are you using as interpreters? Are you using interpreters? Are they at the standard? Are they fluent? Do they know the medical terminology, et cetera, et cetera? So I saw, someone gave me this letter that they had received from Kapilani Medical Center, and it was written in November, because they had a big health, actually the Joint Commission had a meeting of all the hospitals here, like back in October, or maybe early November. And then the phones were ringing. I got phone calls saying, what does this mean? What can we do? Da, da, da. And then an interpreter organization received this letter, and I'm going to, I stole it so I could read it to you. And it says here, dear so-and-so, thank you for providing us with interpretation services. In 2011, the Joint Commission has accredited some of our Hawaii Pacific Health hospitals, which was an achievement of which we're really proud of. Hawaii Pacific Health Hospitals, I don't know. A recommendation for improvement was made that the hospitals be explicit in communicating expectations for contracted services against which quality could be measured. So they're trying to measure the quality of interpreter services. Accordingly, we are writing to delineate contractual expectations for quality more specifically and how they might be met. In the future, we will work with you to delineate these in the contract. The expectations are: 1, your organization will provide annual evidence of updates to personnel requirements, such as current licensures, certificates, annual performance evaluations, and health clearances, like TB shots and things like that. These shall be maintained in a manner that is accessible for purposes of audits and accreditation surveys. 2, your organization will maintain all applicable accreditations, certificates, licenses, and training based on the National Council on Interpreting in Healthcare document. You will need to provide Hawaii Pacific Health with documents on an annual basis indicating training was provided and completed successfully by interpreters providing services to healthcare facilities. So now they have to get trained. This is great because a lot of people are not trained. 3, collaboration in quality improvement and monitoring projects to include a yearly report. Hawaii Pacific Health requests that, and that Hawaii Pacific Health includes Kapilani, Straub, and the Doctors on Wheels or whatever that is in Waikiki, a lot of, anyway. Hawaii Pacific Health requires, this includes 2 measures. 1, on monitored interpretation service, the number of successful interactions. 2, response time when called for services and if completed as requested. So we will forward our continued part. We look forward to our continued part. So I thought that was very interesting that the hospitals themselves, this did not come, this came from the chief executive officer. So the CEO is really taking this seriously. I don't know if the doctors are taking it seriously, but they're trying to put the pressure on the agencies who provide interpreters, which is great. And that's why, like, our office has been getting calls. What do we do to get our interpreters certified? I'm like, oh, now you want certification. And that's how it ended up that I actually got a hold of that letter. And they want to get training, they want to get certified. So what's happening is the pressure from laws and policies are starting a lot of rumble, and they realize that these people are requiring higher they have higher expectations. So that means they're going to, in the past, community interpreters were just that. They were found in the community. A lot of them are volunteers. I was in Hilo a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to someone who works in the emergency room. And I said, so where do you get your interpreters? And they go, oh, interpreters? Oh, we rarely use them. We do have a phone service, but doctors get frustrated because they can never find our languages, and so they end up just doing hand signals. And one time, I studied French when I was in junior high school, so they used me to interpret. I go, they use you to interpret French? I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, one time our janitor down the hall, we had to get him because he was a Spanish speaker. I'm like, oh, I see. I'm like, oh. And then I finally got a hold of, I finally actually stealthily talked to the one in charge of interpreters at Hilo Hospital. He finally called me back yesterday because I just wanted to, ask questions to kind of prod him from, thinking about this quality. And he said, oh yeah, we just do emergency service interpreters. I go, well, what about your everyday appointments? He goes, oh, there's no need. And I'm like, you don't need interpreters for everyday appointments, but only emergencies. Yeah. And I'm like, because you're using like just family and friends or something? Yeah, they get by. And I'm like, okay, and what, okay, and so Queens, and I said, Queens has a policy now. They started a couple years ago that they won't allow friends and family members to interpret. He goes, oh, the law has changed. And I said, the law? Little did he know that, I know the law. I go, oh, which law? Why don't you tell me what law? I'm just curious. And he says, oh, the law that now patients can choose not to use an interpreter or their own family and friends if they want to. So, and he's talking about these standards called the CLAS standards, CLAS. And these are called, it's culturally, linguistically appropriate services. It came out years ago. And there's one statement when it talks about interpreter services that the patient still has the right. They have the final say whether or not they want to work with this interpreter or not. Or if, whatever, they can refuse to work with an interpreter. They have the final say if they want. So he said, we're creating a document that they can sign off so that we don't need to have an interpreter. And I'm saying, okay, I understand. So he's basically pushing, and if this is going out online, I have to be careful. But these are his words. So it was interesting how they are approaching this issue. If we can move the issue under the carpet and not worry about it, then it's off of my, Kuriana, I guess, right? So I don't have to worry about it. But yet, a lack of understanding of how an LEP speaker feels when they walk in and they're emotional and their English is down the tube and they just they want to know the answers. And we all know, being second language speakers, how important health is and how important, our health is, basically. And many times, they're having, he says, oh, even if a family member is there, at least they, and what I heard someone tell me that they were interpreting at a hospital here, and they were a trained interpreter. And when they were interpreting for the patient, and then the granddaughter kept answering the questions of the doctors in English. And so the patient was left out of it, but she started simultaneously interpreting because she was one of our former students and she learned how to simultaneously interpret. So she was simultaneously interpreting what the doctor and the patient were saying, and they just started talking to each other. And this was in Marshallese, okay? And of all languages, in other words, we have simultaneous Marshallese interpreters, we do. And so she's doing, and then the patient suddenly said, excuse me, why is the doctor talking to my granddaughter when I'm the patient? And so she goes, excuse me, why is the doctor, and she interpreted that, talking to the granddaughter when I'm the patient? And the doctor goes, oh, bing. And so with what we found is that with interpreting services, patients and clients are becoming empowered because language is power. So so the need for future good language speakers and interpreters and translators is incredible in the future here in Hawaii. And that's where I wanted to ask you, what do you think, now that we're coming to a close, what do you think the need is, or the need is going to be in Hawaii after hearing all of that? And if we could get some interaction, that would give me a chance to breathe. What do you think is the need, is going to be a future need? Yeah,
Well, I mean, I can see the need for a certification, and probably a local certification that deals with the languages that Hawaii has, because it is more diverse probably than huge areas of the mainland, as you mentioned, someplace like Texas, which might have a large percentage of second language speakers, but they're all Spanish speakers, for example, or they might have some Navajo in there or something.
Right.
Whereas Hawaii, with 2 million inhabitants or something, and 125 languages or something, so I think that certification seems like it'll be a locally needed kind of
Okay,
area.
and just to repeat that so people, who's watching this can hear, about a locally needed certification you mean in interpreting or something, okay? All right. And I think what's going to happen also, and maybe I can just say this, I think what's happening is that they're really pushing for people in government jobs. They're pushing to find people who speak another language, especially needed languages. So that's something that a lot of our students, when they graduate, may think, okay, now where am I going to get a job? Well, maybe I'll go into teaching. But they don't think about government agencies when actually their language could be a very big draw for them, could be a very good, a positive skill for them to have in these government agencies especially. That's another need that I think our students can fill. Another thing, the good thing about, and I wanted to introduce something about CITS, Center for Interpretation and Translation has classes that someone can take, like one class in medical interpreting, or one class in court interpreting, or community interpreting, or introduction to the skills of interpreting, or et cetera. And I think a lot of students don't know that, and I think we need to actually get the word out to students who, if more departments would say, hey, we can transfer those credits to, help in your graduation, be a part of that graduation process. I think especially those who are in the language field maybe can use a class like that, because in the future they really may be asked to interpret. I have one student who is a Japanese major, but he was Chinese, and he got on the JET program, so right now he happens to be in Japan. But he's been there for the last 3 years. But instead of using him as a teacher, they put him in the admin part. So he ended up in the main office, and he ended up interpreting because he spoke Chinese, and he took one of our classes, and Japanese and English. And he said, even after taking the class, he said, well, this is really hard. I should have taken more classes. And he writes me, I wish I would have taken all of your classes, because I really need it now. Because I interpreted for the mayor of this county, or the mayor of that, and it was really a lot of pressure, So it's interesting that our interpreters will end up, may end up using their language in the future in more ways than just teaching or something like that. So, and I think most of you know this, but just to put it up here, the Center for Interpretation Translation Studies, there's our website and our email address. And if you know someone who may be interested, have them sign up. We have students as well as, what do you call it, non-traditional students. We always don't cross list, but we dual list our course through Outreach College. So we have a lot of non-traditional students, people in the community who are also taking our classes with the students. And that's why you see a lot of the older people who realize, hey, I need training. And this picture happens to be from our Summer Institute, which focuses on the skills of interpreting rather than on the knowledge of medical or court, but really the skills of interpreting, the basis of interpreting, the basics of interpreting. So we offer translation courses in various languages. And in fact, just to let you know, our translation course, in case students are interested, we offered my particular translation course, TI 401. We had all these languages. It's hard to teach a translation course to students whose language you don't even speak. So it's very challenging. But what was great is that in collaboration with the community, we had a project where they translated Cinnamon's menu. And I don't know if you know Cinnamon's restaurant. If you search at Cinnamon's, it's in Kailua, very well known. And now they actually put the menus up online, and they have the Japanese and the Spanish, you know. So it was a fun project. And of course, we all get to go eat there in the near future. They thanked us very much. But anyway, these are kind of very practical things that we can include in our classes. And also we have interpreting courses, we have skills-based, we also have court interpreting, medical interpreting, community interpreting. And we also have the 6-week summer intensive interpreter training where people come in from all over the world to take the training. And that's very high level. So that's just who we are. These are the main languages that we offer in the summer: Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, and Spanish. And then here's some students we have a optional certificate exam at the end, but that's mainly for conference interpreting. And some get the chance of a lifetime. This is a student who came from South Africa to be trained, and he went back and he was interpreting for the president. They put them in a booth, and they have to watch it by video because of the, I guess he can look down, but also he has a screen. So he happened to be interpreting for President Clinton, and his colleague took that picture and he sent it to us. And then of course there's, you've probably seen this one before, our student right there interpreting for the First Lady of Peru, the one right next to her, and of course Michelle Obama, I think, during the APEC. So it's amazing the opportunities they may have, not just in the community, but also in international sense. Okay? Any questions? Hope that was informative, and I hope people will watch this online. And anyway, but we want to thank you. Now let me explain our next guest. It happens to be Siegfried Ramler. He was one of the first simultaneous interpreters that actually used equipment, and that was from the Nuremberg trials in Germany after World War II. They had to figure out how to have 4 languages interpreted all at the same time, and he'll explain how they called IBM and how they got interpreters and translators to help with that trial that lasted quite some time, the Nuremberg trial. So he's going to come. He's an East-West Center fellow, I guess, and he's going to be speaking with us in March, and it's the first Thursday at 3 p.m. in March. So let people know, and again, when we're going to put this up online, and so please let your students know. Maybe you can have a link to our cits.hawaii.edu website and find the link. That would be great if you could just pass it around. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you.